Greetings. This is a game that I like to show my beginners to illustrate capturing en passant. Now, it illustrates a few other things. It also illustrates discovered check and double check, and checkmate. And it illustrates the Greek gift sacrifice, which means it also illustrates the fact that although I tell my beginners, as chess teachers usually do, that as a general rule, they ought to get castled early in the game, there are occasions when it's a really bad idea to castle, and this game shows one of them. So without any further ado, so this is a game between someone named Gundersen and someone named Faul. It was played in 1928. I don't know either player. I have no familiarity with either player. White began with e4, black with a French defense. The French defense, of course, has a name that makes sense. Some chess openings names don't make much sense. The pterodactyl, where did that come from? The hippopotamus? About half of my students tell me that the hippopotamus defense looks like a hippopotamus. And about half say, huh? And I'm in the huh category. But okay, if it looks like it to some people, that's fine. But some openings just have names that don't make much sense. You just have to accept that they're the names. The French defense makes sense. There was a team of English players in London and a team of French players in Paris playing a match in the 1900s. So, sorry, in the 1800s, 19th century, 1800s. And the French players kept playing e6 against e4. So the opening got the name French defense. That makes sense. And d4, d5, this is normal. e5, the advanced variation. Black plays c5, so he's immediately challenging white's central pawn. He's trying to challenge white's center. And white plays c3, so that now, if black takes, white can take back with a pawn, and he'll still have these nice central pawns. Now, nowadays, we don't usually take. We usually just put pressure on d4 by putting the knight there, by putting the queen there. We usually pile up pressure on that pawn. Just pile up pressure on the pawn. But in this game, black took right away. White recaptured, and black played check with his bishop. White moved his knight out, blocking. So now the knight's pinned against the king. Black moved his queen's knight out. White moved his king's knight out, so they're developing their pieces. That black knight, that king's knight, would love to have gone to f6. Trouble is, with this French advance pawn there, can't really do that. And it doesn't really want to go to h6. First of all, it's the edge of the board. Second, if white wants to, he can just zap it off and give black terrible pawns. And so, you know, instead, black plays knight to e7, knight g to e7. And white moves his bishop to d3. And black castles. Now, you might remember I said there are occasions when it's a terrible idea to castle. Usually, yes, you want to get castled early in the game, and you see both players do it most games, but there are occasions when it's a bad idea. This is one of them. Remember, there's no knight there, so there's no knight protecting h7. That's important. Black castles, and white plays something called the Greek gift sacrifice. He sacrifices his bishop on h7. Why is it called the Greek gift sacrifice? Well, if you've ever heard of the Iliad, the famous epic poem by the ancient blind poet Homer, the ancient Greek blind poet Homer, talks about a war between the city of Troy, whose inhabitants were called Trojans, and the Greeks. And back then, cities were fortified. So the city of Troy had fortifications around it. It was very difficult to get in. So the Greeks were trying to attack. They were laying siege to the city, but they couldn't get in. So they came up with an idea. They built this gigantic wooden horse on wheels, put it outside the gate of the city of Troy, and then, sneaked away. And when the Trojans looked out and saw this gigantic wooden horse out there, they wondered what it was. And they looked around, they didn't see any Greek soldiers, so they opened up their gate, pulled this gigantic wooden horse on wheels into the city, and closed the gate again. Well, eventually night fell. When night fell, the Trojans went to their homes in the city of Troy. And then out of that giant wooden horse came Greek soldiers who had been hiding inside that wooden horse. And they were able to attack the city because now they were inside. So we have the saying, beware Greeks bearing gifts. That comes from that epic poem, the Iliad. Well, a Greek gift is one that, yeah, you can accept, but you probably shouldn't accept. It's probably a bad idea. And that's the way this bishop sacrifice is. So white sacrifices his bishop, but it's bad for black to take. It's not so terribly good for him to leave it alone either. King takes bishop, and now the knight pops out check, which you'll notice clears this diagonal for the white queen. And now black has four choices. He can move here, in which case he gets mated in two, check. King over, checkmate, supported by the knight. Okay, that can happen. Or he can move back this way, which gets him a little more time, because now when the queen comes out, it's not check. But white is threatening mate. And no, this doesn't help. You're still mated because the knight controls that square. So the king can't escape that way. And no, this won't help. It's still mate. And no, this won't help. It's still mate. All black can do here is move the rook over. And then check. King over. And then check. And the knight comes back and blocks. So it's not done yet. Knight check. The king has a square to walk away. And it looks like he's getting away. Looks like he's going to walk over to the queen side and he'll be okay. No. Check. Skewering the king and the queen. Skewering the king and the queen. So this game also shows a skewer. I forgot about that. And if black doesn't want to just walk away and lose his queen, he doesn't want to just lose his queen, he has to block. But if he blocks this way with the pawn, then that's checkmate. That's checkmate. This pawn controls the square. The queen controls that square. And those squares, the queen controls. So that's it. It's mate. So you can't block with the pawn. Well, the only other thing you can do is block with the knight. That might not look so bad because now black's threatening white's queen. But white doesn't actually have to take the knight. He could take the knight right away, but he doesn't have to. What he can do is this. And if you look at the computer's evaluation, it's plus 5.53. This knight's going to die. It's pinned, so it can't move anywhere. It'll be taken by the pawn or the knight or the bishop or the queen. If the king moves away to d7, then, okay, you can take with any number of ways. If you take with the knight, it's check. And now you're going to get the rook too. Right? You're forking the king and the rook. So you'll get the rook for the knight. Or If he moves king d7, you can take with the bishop, which is also fine. And the computer gives bishop e7, and then white castles, and white's just better. White's just better. Or you could take with the queen, or you could take with the pawn. I would take with the knight because I think the fork looks good, right? That fork looks good. And if he walks the king away, take the rook check, which also attacks the queen. So the queen better take the knight. Or was there a better move? When the king moved, maybe there was queen takes pawn check. No, that doesn't work. No, it's knight takes. That's the right move. And queen takes. And if we look at the material, queen each, rook each, knight each, dark square bishop each. White has another rook. Black only has another bishop, so white's up in exchange. And count the pawns. White has 7 pawns. Black only has 5. So white's up in exchange and 2 pawns. I think white's winning. Well, that's what happens if black moves his king back. So moving back gets him made. Moving straight back gets him mated in 2. Moving back this way gets him down in exchange in a couple of pawns at best. If he moves here, well then you have your choice. Double check, check by the bishop, and check by the knight, and forks the king, the queen. So you win the queen. Or you could take this way. It's still discovered check. The knight here was in the way of the bishop, checking the king. But when the king moved up here, he put himself on the same diagonal as the bishop, so those discovered checks are killers. So when he goes there, well, let's go there. When he goes there, you can go either there or you can go or there. Doesn't matter. Once he gets out of check, you'll still take the queen. Take your pick. You can choose which one you like better. All right. So that would be bad. That leaves the move he played, which is king to g6. And now, sometimes in this sort of position, you see queen to g4, setting up discovered check. And sometimes you see h4. Now, in this position, the computer seriously prefers h4. And that's what was played. If you play queen to g4 instead, that's a much smaller advantage for white. White's still better, but the computer gives white a much smaller advantage. Instead of plus 6 point something, it's plus 1 point something. So the computer much prefers h4. I'm not entirely sure why, but after f5, queen to g3, f4, queen to g4, queen to a5, piling up on that c3 square with the threat of bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes pawn, forking king and rook. Then white castles out of it. Bishop takes c3, bx c3. Now rook to f5. Black's putting up some resistance here. White can still move the knight and get a discovered check. With the queen, he can still do that. Instead, the computer says bishop takes f4. And white is better, but it's now plus 2 point something. White's still better. But the computer prefers h4, which is what white played. Now black takes the d pawn. I am not sure why. I'm not sure why that doesn't just give away the knight. But white doesn't bother taking the knight. Instead, he moves his queen out to g4. which is plus 6.31, and yet the computer says it's an inaccuracy. Well, if I play an inaccuracy and it's plus 6.31, I'm playing white. Plus means white's winning. If it's plus 6.31, I don't care if there's another move that's plus 9.04. I don't care. The computer preferred h5 check. I don't much care. Plus 6 is good. Black played f5, and suddenly it's mate in 3. Now at this point, white could take en passant. Why? Because this f pawn, if it had moved 1 square, the white pawn could have taken it. But remember, there was a rules change many years ago. Centuries ago, there was a rules change, so that pawns didn't have to move just 1 square on their first moves. They could move 2 squares and just bypass this pawn. So, bingo, he just bypassed this. And back when the rules were being changed, somebody noticed that his pawn before could have captured, but now this guy just walked right by. Well, I didn't get my chance to take the pawn. So they made a special rule called capturing en passant, so that the moment this pawn moves like this guy, which could have captured it had it moved only 1 square, had it moved only 1 square, this pawn could have taken it. Well, then if it moves 2 squares, this pawn can still take it, only it has to do it right away. Can't wait a move to do it. Has to do it right away. But yes, he could have done that. Didn't really want to do that. The white player didn't really want to do that because he wanted the pawn to keep holding on to that square. The pawn holds that square. This knight holds that square. So this king can't walk over toward the queen side. Okay? So white didn't take. But white's queen is under attack. So you imagine he moved the queen. Oh no, h5 check. It's check. He doesn't have to save his queen if he can give check. And now the king can't go there because of that pawn. Can't go there because of that knight. Can't go there because of the knight. Oh, gee, where can he go? He can't take the pawn because of the queen and the rook. Can't take the knight because of the queen and the bishop. Right? Now, all black could do is move his king to h6, but now he's on the same diagonal as that bishop. Oh ho. Oh ho. Now we do have to be a little bit careful because our queen's still under attack. We do have to be a little bit careful. White gives check with his knight. By moving his knight. It's a check by the bishop. It's a discovered check. Now, he could have moved here. A lot of people would want to move to f7, and it's double check. It's double check. The trouble is, if black moves here, and you move your queen in check, well, you lose your queen. All right. If you save your queen, well, then he gets to save his queen. Okay. Or he can just take the knight, which is even better. And now he saved his queen. So the problem with taking, the problem with this double check is that there's no really good follow-up. There's no really good follow-up. Whereas if white takes on e6, as he did, now it's not double check, although it is discovered check. But there's a great follow-up. If the black king moves back, look at that knight controlling g7. Look at that queen controlling g7. Yeah, we'll just take on g7 mate. Yeah, there's a great follow-up now. So you do want to think about not just this move, but the move coming up. Do you have a good follow-up? And in this case, the mere discovered check is actually better than the double check because it gives you a good follow-up. Well, Okay, so black's in check, which means he can't stop to take the queen. Remember, in the previous game I showed, the Dave Taylor under promotion game, black couldn't actually deliver checkmate because he was in check. And it kept being that way, move after move. He's in check, so he can't mate. He's in check, so he can't deliver mate. Well, here, he's in check, so he can't stop to take the queen. He has to get out of check. Black played g5. Black played g5. And now, you notice, if this pawn had moved one square, well, it wouldn't have gotten him out of check. But, say it got him out of check, then this h pawn would have been able to capture, right? Instead, it moved two squares. And that's when the en passant capture rule comes into play then. You can take that pawn. You have to do it immediately. You can't wait. You have to do it immediately. Otherwise, if you do something else, if you stop to save your queen, then you don't get to take en passant next move. No, you've lost your chance. No. But you can take it immediately. So black plays that pawn two squares. If he had moved it one, then you could have taken. So you get to take en passant. The pawn itself disappears. So the pawn in capturing got out of the way of the rook, so now it's checked by the rook. And when it took the pawn, it took the black pawn off of that square, which made that discovered check also. So we have double discovered check. Double discovered check. And if you take another look at it, it's checkmate. So it's capturing en passant, discovered check, double discovered check, checkmate. Really neat move. So there you go. So there are occasions when it's a bad idea to castle. And sometimes in the French defense, you find that it's a bad idea. This bishop is staring down at this diagonal. There's no knight here guarding the square. And sometimes in the French defense, it's a bad idea for black to castle kingside. Sometimes it is. And in this game it was. And it was because of zap, the Greek gift sacrifice, which depends on having this bishop. And obviously it could be there. It could be there, somewhere along this diagonal, right? And you need this knight to be able to give check. It helps to have this bishop. It's not always necessary, but it helps. And the queen to come out or to come here, depending on the circumstance. So we check. Black takes. It's the Greek gift. They had to accept it. They had to accept it. The Trojans might have wished they hadn't brought that giant wooden horse, the Greek gift, inside their city. And now check. And the king only has one decent square to go to out of the four. And then h4. And that's not being played because you want to somehow develop a pawn. You don't develop pawns. And it's not being played so you can get the rook out, although you might see that in some different position. No, it's being played because this guy's an attacker. This h4 pawn is an attacker. It's like having another piece. And I don't know why black took that pawn. Now the queen comes out, setting up discovered check. Stockfish preferred h5 check. And now we could take en passant. But we don't because we want that pawn to continue controlling that square. The knight controls that square, right? So the king can't walk over to the queen side. He can't walk this way because of those two being controlled by white. So we don't take en passant. Instead, we give check with the pawn. It's a weapon. And the black king only has one square to go to. And now he's on the same diagonal as the bishop. And now we play the knight here instead of there, even though there would be double check. And the only way out of double check is to move your king, which is sometimes that makes double check the best move. But here, if you play the knight here, there's just no good follow-up after king to h7. Whereas if you take here, the knight controls g7, so does the queen. So there's a nice follow-up, a checkmate. So if we take this way, yeah, now there's a follow-up. Now there's a follow-up. Mate. Yeah, okay. So he blocks with a pawn, but now, because it's zipped by this one gets to take en passant. And now it got out of the way of the rook, so it's discovered check by the rook. And it removed the black pawn that was sitting there, so it opened up this diagonal for the bishop. Another discovered check. So it's discovered check two different ways. It's discovered check two different ways, which means it's a double check. And king can't go anywhere. Black has no move. That's mate. So this is a nice little game. I like to show it to illustrate, a few different things. It illustrates the Greek gift sacrifice. It illustrates discovered checks. It illustrates capturing en passant. That's the main reason I show this game. It's a nice little game to show. Gundersen-Faul played in, I think, the Christmas tournament in 1928. Yes, in Pietzcker, Christmas 1928. Yes, so that's when it was played. Okay, so now that's the end of the game. So that's the game. And once again, I will give my chess sign off. Try to win, but especially try to play well.